Good evening, and welcome to SL Tonight. Coming to you tonight, not from our usual studio out on location, but out on location, here at the Witches Center and Cafe. A beautiful space, and I'm grateful to be here. SL Tonight occasionally leaves the studio when the right location presents itself, and this is very much the right location for what we're reading tonight. Edgar Wallace, a name you may know from the King Kong credit, he co-wrote the original story, a name you should know from the crime fiction shelves. At its peak in the late 1920s, it was estimated that one in every four books read in England was an Edgar Wallace. One in four. He wrote over 170 novels, 18 stage plays, and more short stories than most writers produce sentences. He died in Hollywood in 1932 working on King Kong, which is exactly the kind of ending Edgar Wallace would have written for someone else. Tonight's story is Redbeard, from the collection The Stretelli Case and Other Mystery Stories, published in 1930. It's approximately half an hour long, and it earns every minute of that half hour. Murdered spy, a red-bearded assassin, a very elegant woman at a late supper, and a final line that I promise you will not see coming even if you think you have. This is SL Tonight on location, here at Witch's Cafe and Center, or Witch's Center and Cafe, whichever. Let's read. One of his most jealously guarded secrets should have perished when the safety catch of John Mildred's Browning pistol caught in a loose strand of thread as he was pulling his gun. How that thread came to be there may be explained in technical language by Mildred's housekeeper, who kept his clothes in repair. The thread was stout, but broke at the second jerk, and the mischief was done. At the first tug, a loop had formed about the catch and had pulled it to safety, and when John threw his gun at Redbeard, nothing happened. He saw the mischief and thumbed down the catch, but by this time the visitor had fired 3 times, shattering the aortic arch and the pulmonary artery. John, his hands widespread on the table, stared at his murderer, and in the last moment of life God gave him vision. "I'm glad didn't shoot," coughed John Mildred thickly, and smiled. Then he sat down carefully in his writing chair, and as carefully died. I found him reclining over the table, his head on his arms, and phoned Central Office. Evidence produced: one Browning pistol unfired with loop of thread jammed between safety catch and chamber, one broken thread in hip pocket, one weeping hysterical housekeeper who admitted Redbeard at 10:15 p.m. and had heard the shots and Mr. Mildred's last words, "Poor gentleman," and had subsequently been pushed aside by Redbeard. Evidence of unexploded cartridges in Mildred's faithless pistol and 3 shells from the murderer's gun, and Mildred. He was killed by 3 shots from a Holt automatic .45 caliber. Brinkhorn, deputy chief of the department, came along with me to conduct the examination, and he kept the real police at bay in the hall below until we had finished. This, by virtue of our special warrants and the fact that Brinkhorn is all sorts of a great white chief, a deputy sheriff, a puller of strings and what not. Rum how old Mildred hated people with whiskers, I said, remembering John's eccentricity. "I'll bet it was the humiliation of being shot out by Redbeard that hurt him most." "You can't choose your murderer in these times," said Brinkhorn, always a philosopher. "Help me lay him on the sofa. I want to search his pocket." But I suggested leaving him until the real police came. They were frantically jealous folk, and Brinkhorn agreed. John had a little smile on his white face when we, having admitted the impatient coppers, put him down. It was as though he had lived long enough to see a capital joke in circumstances which arranged his dissolution. The police made notes and would have collected his papers and probably have sealed up the room also, but Brinkhorn stopped them, phoned the chief commissioner, and secured endorsement of the divine right of military intelligence to interfere. Then we bundled the cops out of the room, lit our pipes, took off our coats, and got busy. It was a warm room, being centrally heated. We opened the drawers systematically, taking the locked drawers first. John was one of those card index maniacs who flourish even in departments like ours. If you wanted to discover his trouble, you turn up tea, so to speak. As a matter of fact, we knew most of his secrets, but not the cause of his feud with the red-bearded man. We hoped to find it here. He had told us, of course, little bits about Red Whiskers, but had so punctuated his recital with those deep, choking chuckles of his that we never really knew how much there was in it. The point is, said Brinkhorn, sitting down suddenly in the chair from which he had just removed the dead man, you ceased to be sentimental after your 10th violent death. The point is, was old man Mildred pulling our legs when he told us that he was being threatened? Shook my head. I've seen the letters, said I. They follow him about all over the shop. They used to be waiting for him at the club. Even when he went on secret missions, which nobody but you and I knew about, he would find them waiting for him at his hotel, addressed to him and his assumed name. They were always signed Redbeard, and always telling him that his time was near at hand. I shall always remember Acorn as he sat, his chin resting on his hand, his elbow on the table, his eager, handsome face momentarily clouded. He never showed them to me, he said, half to himself. That is curious, because I was one of the best pals. I'm not saying, he said, hastily apologetic, that you didn't know him better in many ways than I, and it's only natural that you should, because you were working together, and most of the coups he pulled off during the war were as much to your credit as to his. In some cases more to his than mine, in some cases more to mine than his, said I. He deserves the whole credit for catching Von Klotz, the woman, Minnie Lauer, and the Pfeiffer gang, whilst I think that pretty well all the credit for catching Smith, the Silver, and Martinique go to me. I may sound immodest, but 4 years of strain and danger and sleepless anxiety have destroyed most of my affectations, even the pose of modesty. Brinkhorn nodded. I think we'd better go through the record of the men he pinched, he said. This is obviously a vendetta, and one of the relatives of the gentleman who marched for the firm step to the gallows, as the newspapers say, is behind this affair. Afterwards we'll talk to housekeeper lady, see if she's quite recovered. By the way, he said suddenly, what happened to that card that was on the floor when we came in? There certainly had been a card, one of those large index cards on which Mildred was wont to enter data, and had certainly been lying midway between the door and the desk when we came into the room. It was not there now. I picked it up, I said, and I put it on the desk. Rinkhorn turned over the papers, but there was no card. Whereupon he cursed all interfering policemen and phoned the nearest station, but without success. The two active and intelligent officers of the law who had made a superficial search of the desk had taken nothing away with them. I looked at Brinkhorn, and Brinkhorn looked at me. It is strange, he said, and we dropped the subject temporarily. There was no difficulty at all in unearthing the record of the men whom Mildred hunted to death. We found the index number under the E, espionage, convictions for, and we took their dossiers out of the deep twin cabinet beneath the bookcase. There they were, the whole crowd of them, and it pleased me to see how he had marked my cases, or rather those in which I played a more prominent part than he, with a big T for Templey, which is my name. We carried them to the desk under the light, and went through them carefully. Willy von Klotz, Hans, and Johann Pfeiffer, the Van Lauer woman, Bissing, Brunza, Schumacher, they were all there. Who was Goertz? Asked Brinkhorn, suddenly. I don't remember that case. You were in France at the time, I said, but it was an ordinary typical case of espionage. Mildred shadowed him for a week before he arrested him at Plymouth. He was shot in the Tower. Brinkhorn read through the closely written pieces in silence, his head in his hands. Listen to this, he said. Von Goertz is an officer of the Prussian Hussars. He speaks English and French fluently. In appearance, he is a fine-looking fellow, tall and well-made. He has a good forehead, blue eyes, and Brinkhorn paused and looked up. A striking red beard. Said I. It's not our red beard at any rate, for Goertz was shot and Mildred saw the execution. You're sure of this? Absolutely, said I. I can give you the name of the provost marshal who superintended the business. There's no chance, of course, of his having got away or having escaped death, mused Brinkhorn. I smiled. Men who are shot at 12 paces with soft-nosed bullets do not, as a rule, escape death, said I dryly. Brinkhorn looked across to the sofa where Mildred lay. Then it wasn't Goertz, he said. Let us have the lady up. Miss Cummins, the housekeeper, had reached the feeble and helpless condition of hysteria, when even the sight of Mildred's body would not unduly distress her, but to make absolutely sure, Brinkhorn and I pushed the sofa into the dressing room and shut the door. We got her seated, and I put her through a mild cross-examination. At 9:30, Mr. Mildred being out, so her story went, there came a ring at the front door, and, thinking it was her employer, she opened it to discover a man on the doorstep. It was snowing heavily, a particularly wild night, and there was only a dim electric light in the doorway, and that covered by an arch shade, so that she had the vaguest impression as to the visitor's appearance. Was he tall? I asked. Middle-sized, if anything. He wore a long fern-lined overcoat and a soft hat, and he had gloves, big furry gloves on his hands. She was emphatic as to the red beard which flowed over the front of his coat and glistened with melting snow. Equally sure that she was that part of his face as was visible was as white as death. He asked if Mr. Mildred was in, and when she said no, he said he would wait. She hesitated, but he was urgent, speaking in a gruff voice which somehow did not seem to her to be natural. Mr. Mildred had so many strange visitors, she said in extenuation, and this we understood perfectly well, that she did not like to deny him, and led the way up to Mildred's room, switching on the table lamp and bringing forward an armchair where he might sit. Happily, her perturbations of mind were set at rest a few moments later, when she heard Mildred's key in the lock of the front door, and went to meet him with the information that a gentleman had called. "And he expected him, sir," said the trembling housekeeper. "When I told him a gentleman was waiting, he said, smiling quite pleasant, 'Has he got a red beard?' And you said, 'Yes,'" said Brinkhorn, nodding. "Did he say anything more to you?" "Nothing more, sir. I heard him go into his room, and then I thought I would go upstairs to find if he wanted anything. He usually had a cup of tea. I was outside the door when I heard voices, then 3 shots." Her lips trembled. "I heard Mr. Mildred say, 'I'm glad I didn't shoot you,' and for a bit I thought it was all right. I was very frightened, sir. I was going downstairs when the door was flung open and the red-bearded gentleman dashed down past me. Then I telephoned to Mr. Templey at his club. Mr. Mildred told me I was always to telephone to Mr. Templey in case of emergency, and that's all I know, sir." "You heard nothing besides the shots and Mr. Mildred's saving, 'I am glad I didn't shoot you.'" "Nothing, sir." "Has the red-bearded gentleman been here before?" "No, sir." "Have you ever been warned not to admit the red-bearded man?" "No, sir." Again she was hesitant. "Mr. Mildred did say," she said, "that he was expecting a funny visitor one of these days, and he asked me how tall I was." "That's a rum question to ask you," smiled Brinkhorn. "I thought it was, sir, but you know Mr. Mildred would have his little joke." Brinkhorn lifted his head. "There's the bell, Miss Cummins. I think you will find it is the police ambulance. I shall leave one of my men here tonight. Nothing must be dusted or tidied or in any way touched in this room until I give you permission." We accompanied Mildred's body and saw him put away in the hospital mortuary. Then I accepted Brinkhorn's invitation to go home with him to supper. "If your wife doesn't object to a visit at this hour," I said. "I just telephoned her," said Brinkhorn, "and should be glad to see you." One of the advantages of marrying a widow, thought I, as the taxi drove slowly across Westminster Bridge in a perfect blizzard, is that she is accustomed to the eccentricities of mankind, and nothing surprises her, even the apparition of her husband arriving home with a guest at midnight. Great minds think alike, and Brinkhorn must have had a telepathic wave. "God has given me a very intelligent wife," he said, with a happy little laugh. "I would like to bet if we gave her all the facts of the case, she would find a solution to the mystery of Redbeard. How she hates the Huns, poor girl." The story of Miss Brinkhorn was known to me. She had been the wife of a Canadian officer, and was on her way to England, accompanied by her baby boy, to join her husband. Her voyage coincided with a big gas attack in the Ypres salient, and her husband was killed on the very day that U-97 had torpedoed a liner in which she was traveling. She and a few passengers who were landed on the Irish coast were the only survivors. Undoubtedly, she hated the Hun. "The case is a pretty simple one," Brinkhorn went back to our dead friend. "Mildred is, or was, a clever servant of the Department of Justice, lent by Washington to our counter-espionage bureau. In the course of the 4 years he brings to justice a large number of German agents, amongst them von Goritz, whose brother determines to be revenged upon the slayer of his relative. Being a Hun and totally ignorant of the Anglo-Saxon temperament, he thinks he will terrorize Mildred by writing threatening letters, the terrorization consisting not so much in the letters and their contents, but lying on the fact that this unknown avenger is able to demonstrate his knowledge of Mildred's movements. He awaits a favorable opportunity, gains admission to Mildred's room, probably ransacks his bureau. By the way, let's find out what happened to that card and shoots our pal. How do you account for Mildred's curious speech? I asked. About being glad he didn't shoot him? Yes, that's rather quaint. Have you any theory? I made no reply. Of course, it may be this, Brinkhorn went on, that Mildred preferred that his murderer should endure the suspense of a trial. That wasn't Mildred's way, said I. There wasn't a kinder-hearted man in the world than John. And what do you think? I'll tell you one of these days, said I, as the cab drew up before the house in Bryanston Square where Brinkhorn lived. Mrs. Brinkhorn was a truly remarkable woman. She showed neither annoyance nor impatience with her husband for bringing a guest to the house at that hour, and I had a nice little supper waiting for us. I had met her once before, but had never been so struck by her ethereal beauty. She wore a negligee costume of deep blue chiffon velvet. It is a sort of costume which to my ignorant eyes might have either been a dressing gown or a dress, but I can only recall an impression of stateliness which was particularly pleasing. The telephone awoke Frank, she said, with a smile. He wants to come down to say good night. Have him down, smiled Brinkhorn. When the sleepy little fellow came toddling into the room, it was clear to me that Brinkhorn loved the child as much as it was his own. He pushed towards me for my admiration. He's a plump, sturdy little chap, and Brinkhorn laughed as I pulled up the leg of his pajama. Sturdy boy, said I, patting his calves. Miss Brinkhorn smiled faintly and put out her hand to the boy. Come along, Frank dear, you must go back to bed. She rejoined us a few minutes later, and by this time we were deep in the discussion of Mildred's end. She listened without interruption until Brinkhorn turned to her. I was saying, my dear, said he, that if we could leave this case in your hands, we would be pretty certain to find Mildred's murderer. You have a very great opinion of my genius, she said. And very rightly, said Brinkhorn warmly. Now I'm going to tell you, Templey, what I have never told anyone else. I've had a great deal of success in this war, and half of it is due to my wife. She's been my ghost and done a lot of the work I have got credit for. Yes, you have, dear, he said, and then she laughingly protested. I rely on your judgment absolutely. Mr. Templey is shocked, she smiled. He thinks you have been betraying terrible government secrets to me. It takes a great deal to shock me, Mrs. Brinkhorn, said I, and I must confess that I am tremendously interested in what your husband says. Although he is not aware of the fact, I have taken up Mildred's murder, and I intend applying myself single-handedly to tracking down Mr. Redbeard, and I believe you can be of the greatest assistance to me. They both stared at me. You think I've been pertinent, said I, and it certainly does sound as though I was taking advantage of your confidence and hospitality. But there are points in this case which your husband has overlooked, and which I feel sure I could, with your assistance, elucidate. Mysteries which could be cleared up. Including the mystery of the disappearing index card, interrupted Brinkhorn. Even that, said I. I should be glad to help you, said the girl. I judged her to be about 27. When would you like to call me into consultation? She asked, with quiet laughter in her eyes. There's a challenge for you, mocked Brinkhorn. If it were not so late, I should say now, said I. Brinkhorn roared with laughter. I'll go up and hold the boy's hand until he goes to sleep, he said. How long is this consultation going to last? 10 minutes, I suggested. Brinkhorn exchanged amused glances with his wife. In 10 minutes, when I come back, you shall have the whole mystery cleared up. Mildred's assailant shall be in the hands of justice. Won't promise that, said I, but I promise that I shall know who committed the murder. He paused at the door. Don't forget the missing card, he said. That is the first mystery which shall be unraveled, said I, and the door clicked behind him. For a second or so we looked at one another, and then the laughter died out of her eyes. Now, Mr. Templey, she added quietly. Are you left-handed, Mrs. Brinkhorn? I asked. No. Why? She colored slightly. I'll tell you in a moment, said I, and putting my hand in my inside jacket pocket, I took out a card and laid it on the table. We'll settle the question of the missing card straight away. I picked it up from the floor and I put it in my pocket. Will you read it? She took it in her hand and her eyebrows rose. Why, this is all about me, she said. I think you know, I said, that Mr. Mildred had a passion for collecting data about his cases. Let me read this to you. Mary Mabel Tensall, born New Jersey, 1891, married George O. Fenton, citizen USA, Detroit, 1912. One son, lived Canada, husband killed Ypres salient, April 1915, first Canadians. Mary Maybell and her child on way to meet her husband, April 1915 in SS Calgary. Mined or torpedoed off the fastnets with all hands and passengers except few survivors brought to Queenstown. Note they were third class. Underneath was written, MMT booked from St. Paul, local sleeping office, first class saloon tickets. I and my boy were two of the survivors, she said. Read underneath, Miss Brinkhorn. You'll see those words. MMT booked from St. Paul, local shipping office, first class saloon tickets. But that proves what I say. I traveled first class. No, first class passengers were saved, said I. That is a mistake, she replied quietly. Mr. Mildred got things all wrong. Now I will read you a little memorandum that I took myself this evening about a man named von Goritz, who was shot in the Tower of London in the early part of 1915. Von Goritz is supposed to have been working with his wife and child. Well, asked Miss Brinkhorn. Here is another little item I jotted down from Mildred's description. It was from the body marks of von Goritz. Mole, right shoulder, large orange-colored birthmark on the inside of left calf. Well, said Miss Brinkhorn again. Your boy has that mark too, Miss Brinkhorn. There was a long silence then. And now, I asked, will you please show me your right hand? She made no movement. You served me tonight with your left. That is why I asked if you were left-handed. You passed the bread with your left hand. You poured out the wine for me with your left hand. Will you please let me see your right? What an absurd request, she said. She didn't show me. When a Browning pistol is fired, said I, there is an escape of gas from the chamber which leaves a black patch on the hand between the finger and the thumb. Will you show me your right hand? There was a silence. No, I will not, she said. Then I will tell you the rest of the story, said I. You were in Ireland when your husband was killed. You were at Queenstown when the survivors came in. To my knowledge, they were searching for the wife of von Goritz, and it was pretty well known that Miss von Goritz, the Baroness von Goritz, she corrected. I beg your pardon, said I, was in Ireland. You had sworn to yourself to avenge the death of your husband, and the torpedoing of the Calgary gave you your opportunity. Posing as the wife of Captain Fenton, you made your way to London, sought out Brinkhorn, who fell in love with you. You married him that you might get deeper into the secrets of his bureau. It was because he trusted you and confided in you that you know all the movements of Mildred, which were often known only to myself and your husband. It was you, and you alone, who shot him, and he recognized you just before his death and said he was glad he had not shot you. She was as white as a sheet and sat bolt upright, her hands folded in her lap. What are you going to do? She asked. It's the only question I couldn't answer. I had laid my watch on the table when Brinkhorn went out, and 6 minutes had already passed. You may think that I'm trying to escape you, she said, and that I'm lying to save my life. There was a thrilling sincerity in her voice, and I did not doubt her. I loved my husband. I adored him. To me, he was a god. We German women have a capacity for adoration which you will never understand. You'll understand less, and believe me, less, when I tell you that I love Frank Brinkhorn. Will you give me until 12 o'clock tomorrow to decide? I nodded. Brinkhorn came in a few minutes later. Well, he said jovially, have you made your great discovery? I laughed. Miss Brinkhorn has been very helpful, I said, rising to go. Aren't you going to tell me? He said in mock disgust. Tomorrow, said I. He looked at me sharply. What an officious devil you are, Templey, said he, and I didn't realize that you knew I had resigned from the department. Resigned from the department? It was my turn to be surprised. When did this happen? Today, said he. But for Mildred's death, Grace and I would be leaving for South America on Saturday. I have a ranch in Argentine, and I want to get the bugs and cobwebs of war out of my brain. I looked at Miss Brinkhorn, and there was an appeal in her eyes which I had never seen before, and I hope I shall never see again. Then, said I, with a gaiety which I did not feel, I will extend your time, madam, until Saturday midnight. I do not know whether she ever told Brinkhorn. I had a wire from him last week saying he didn't intend returning to England and asked me to settle his bills. And the last word in the wire was thanks. I found I had to settle Miss Brinkhorn's bills as well, and there was one from Clarkson for spirit gum and red crepe hair. I paid it without batting a lid. After all, Mildred, standing on the borderline of eternity, was glad he had not killed her, and Mildred was a pal of mine, and his implied wishes were sacred. Still, I thought it was funny that I should have to pay for the red beard. And that is Red Beard by Edgar Wallace. Mildred recognized her as he died and chose mercy. Simply recognized her over supper and chose the same. Brinkhorn never recognized her at all, which is either the greatest failure of his career or the one thing that saved what remained of his life. Wallace wrote that story in 1930 and has not dated a single day. The craft is invisible, every clue in plain sight, every piece of misdirection completely fair, the ending completely inevitable in retrospect and completely surprising in the moment. That is what the best crime fiction does. Thank you to the Witches Center and Cafe for having us tonight. SL Tonight goes where the stories take us. Remember, folks, like, comment, subscribe, and we are where the nightmares go. Good night.